Aloha and welcome to this screencast, E53, Digits Part 5. I really like this screencast almost the most out of any of them because we're going to start to move into the realm of really a more realistic web application. And what I mean by that is that the kind of data, we're moving away from just a simple schema where all our data goes into one single place. That's not how real applications, unless they're super trivial, ever work. Usually you have lots of different types of data that have to be interrelated in various ways. And the way we're going to study this in this practice WAD is by extending our list contacts to allow there to be any number of time-stamped notes associated with a single contact. So you imagine this is like your address book and you got somebody you want to, I don't know, sell something to or whatever, and you call them up, and each time you have a conversation with them, you want to type out a little note saying, what happened. And so when you start to, if you initially think about this and you just look at this page right here, you might say to yourself, well, this isn't that hard. Basically, I can tell that, each contact should have an array of objects in it. Each object has a timestamp and a string. What's the big deal? Okay, this is simple. And that is fairly simple. The problem is it's not very extensible. Imagine if you wanted to create a new page in your application called Notes, where you would list all of the notes that you'd entered in reverse chronological order by timestamp. Now, all of a sudden, that data structure choice, or that implementation choice of having an array associated with each contact looks terrible, right? You got to go through, first of all, you got to go through all your contacts. You got to extract that array. You're going to create this big list. You're going to have to sort it by timestamp. It's crazy. And, I can come up with any number of other additional things. Each time, it just gets worse and worse to use that kind of data structure implementation. And so the if you've taken a database class, you wouldn't maybe even think of that as the most natural solution. What you'd think is, oh, there needs to be another table called Notes, where we store all our notes, and we have a created at field, and we maybe have a contact field, and those things are foreign keys, and then life is wonderful. We can manipulate this data any way we want, and kind of build all sorts of things. So if you take a database class, basically you're going to get away from maybe your initial naive ideas about how to implement some of these things, and be a little more sophisticated, which will enable you to do a lot more with the data, ultimately in a much easier way by having an upfront design. And this design is called the data model. And so if you haven't taken a database class, don't worry. I know most of you haven't. I'm not assuming that you have. And so one of the fun things about this particular practice WAD is that you start to kind of have to think about, well, how am I going to organize my data in such a way that it can be interrelated to each other and easily retrieved, and so forth. So that can be fun. It can be exasperating, but it can also be fun. So what I talk about here is the structure that we're going to use to solve this problem. We already have a users collection, and basically users have a document ID that's assigned by Mongo and is held in a special field called _ID. And then we know that it turns out to have this emails field, but more importantly, it has a username field, which is the email address, and a roles field, which tells us when they're admins. Note that the username field could also be used as a primary key or unique ID, because all the usernames have to be distinct. The contact collection, which we made, has this structure. The _ID field, document ID field, has been created by Mongo for us, but these are all the things in our schema. And what we're going to do now is create a notes collection. And that notes collection will have this _document ID field. created by Mongo and maintained by Mongo, although those things will be unique. And it will have a note field, which is what you type into the little form. And then whenever you hit submit, we will generate a date object that will indicate the timestamp at which the note was created. And then the contact ID is going to be the doc ID of the associated user who created this note. So you can see this EHT, SBT, whatever it is, that corresponds to this particular user, which is me, okay, or I should say this contact, okay. And then we also in this field indicate the owner, okay, and in this case for this contact ID, the owner is john@foo.com. Second one also has that same contact ID, so we're indicating which contact. It's this one. The contact is the contact for Henry Casanova. The owner of that contact is again john@foo.com. Last one is just the other one. Now at this point, some of you might be asking yourselves, why do I need that owner field? The contact ID field is really enough. From the contact ID field, I can get to this row, and in this row, I can find out what the owner is. I don't really need that. It's redundant. That's exactly true. It is redundant, but it turns out that redundancy in this case makes our life as a developer much simpler. Because one of the things we want to do is only publish to the client the notes that are owned by the user who's logged in. We don't want the user who's logged in to be able to see all the notes written by everybody in the system. And so by including the owner field in the notes collection, it makes it extremely simple for us to create a publication which will only provide to the client those notes that are owned by that particular person, that were created and should be managed by that particular person. We could do it without providing this field. It just would be a lot, there'd be a level of indirection, and it'd be more code. And so by providing this small additional amount of information in each of the documents, we make it very, very simple for us to provide only those notes that the user owns to them in the client. Okay. So that's the overview of data models. I know I'll be talking about that with you folks as you build your final projects. And the first thing to do is to merge the context form branch into master. So I don't think I did that. So I'll just show you how I do that. I switch to master, and then I say merge into current branch, context form 1, and then we push origin, and now master contains the result of all the context form branch. And really, I have this bad habit of having Meteor running while I do GitHub stuff. I really shouldn't do that. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a Control-C, Meteor reset, and Meteor npm run start. The reason why this is a bad habit is because if you're switching back and forth between branches in a complicated system, the data model and actually the contents of the database could be different in different branches. And if you're switching around in GitHub on top of a running system, things can really go south quickly. So it's really best to quit GitHub before you do. It's best to quit Meteor before you do GitHub operations. If you do the GitHub operation, then at least quit out of Meteor at that point and maybe do a Meteor reset to clear out the database and rerun it, and then everything will be copacetic. Okay, so localhost 3000. Let's just do a refresh here, and we'll log in as john@foo.com. And here we are. So everything's cool. And so at this point, we have to start our timer. So we'll go start. First thing we want to do is create a branch to hold our work. So we're going to create a branch called notes1. Notes1. Now, when I'm creating a branch, this is a GitHub operation where I don't have to worry about Meteor because I'm creating a branch off the current branch. There's nothing that's changing code-wise. This is just an internal little Git operation in the .git folder, and so that's not gonna be worrisome. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is create the note collection. So we'll make a copy of the contact directory in the API directory, and we'll call this directory note. We'll rename contacts.js to notes.js, and we'll edit the contents. And then most importantly, we've got a note contactee owner that are strings and created at, which will be a date. Okay, so let's start doing that. Of course, we'll have to go to here to make that happen. All right, so here we are. There we go. Here we are in the API directory. We're going to make a copy of the contact directory called note, and then we will rename contacts to notes. Do you also want to rename the constant and its usages to notes? Yeah, sure. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we got this notes. So constant is called notes, new Mongo collection name contacts. Of course, that's not right. And then not a contact schema, but a note schema. So, you know, I mean, that didn't really help us too much having IntelliJ try to be smart. And then I could have done a refactor there. I could have showed you that. Anyway, maybe next time. Okay, so note schema. And then what we've got here is we've got an owner string. We've got a contact ID string. I think these should be that. And wait, what did we say this thing was? Note, contact ID, and owner. Oh, note. Note string. Owner, contact ID, and then created at, which is a date. All right, so there is our schema. We attach the note schema to notes, and we export notes and notes schema. So that looks pretty good. So now we're going to edit publication.js to provide a publication called notes that publishes all the notes associated with the current logged in user. So let's go to publications. I'll try to get, there we go. Okay, let's go to publications. And let's look for one that publishes, I think this is a good one to use as our base because it does what we want. It's going to publish you know, only those objects associated with the current, where the owner field is the same as the currently logged in user. So we'll create a new one called notes. The publication name is notes. And then we find the username. And what we return is going to be finding all of the notes that are where the owner field is the same as the logged in user. And then we have to import notes. Okay. Get the green check mark. Okay, the next thing we want to do is to create a note component. And that will display each note. So if you look at this up here, you see that little guy there? That's a note that we're displaying. So it's going to go right underneath the edit in each contact. So we'll make a copy of the contact.js component and call it note.jsx to display each note. We're going to use the Semantic UI Feed. So feed is this really cool component in Semantic UI for which we'll use none of the cool things, unfortunately. But you can see, like, there's just awesome, cool things you can do. Um, so I'm going to use it even though the results are going to be very boring. But I just wanted you guys to see that, in fact, there's all this super cool, extra event dates, all these kind of things we can do with them. So what we're going to do is create a copy of contact.jsx called note.jsx. So copy of contact.jsx. I'm going to call that note.jsx. And then let's try propeller R contact note, and note that I've got the match case. If I didn't have the match case, it was going to match all sorts of stuff here. But I can do this to kind of not have to type quite as much. So here's our note, and but it has all this contact stuff in it. And basically, you could have spent some time trying to come up with how to use all these feed things to make it. But I don't really want you to spend time in this WOD figuring out semantic UI, playing around with semantic UI stuff. So let's just know that this is a totally reasonable way to do it. Okay, and we're gonna have to import feed so that all those component things are available. We won't need a link anymore, so get rid of that. And we'll note that the props variable has to have a note on it. So instead of contact, we can just say note, and then we have to pass in a note property, and then we'll extract the date that's created at, and then that's a date object. And then I fiddled around a little bit to figure out a way to kind of display it fairly reasonably. Again, I didn't want you to have to worry about that for this WOD. You can figure that out for your final project. And then the actual description of the note is a note inside a note. Inside the note object, there's a field called note that has the description. All right, so that looks pretty good. Get the green check. Now we're going to add this note feed to each contact. So we have to display all these notes. Okay, so we're going to go to contact.js and put the following at the bottom of each contact. Okay, and so if we go to contact.js x, and then we paste, okay, what we can see is feed is undefined, so we need to add feed. And then we need a new property called notes, which is going to be an array of note things, note objects. So we say notes prop types dot array dot is required. Okay, and then also, we also need a note. So our note is import note from note. Okay, so we specify the current directory and then the note file .jsx within it. Okay, so not sure what this is, why we don't get a green check. Element is not exported. Oh, look at that. Oh my goodness. Okay, the green check. So what this IntelliJ inspection just told us, I didn't know it did that, is in this note, we have a default export, right? And when you have a default export, as I noted in another screencast, you can't use those curly braces because that indicates it's a named export. Okay, and so the fact that I didn't have the green check got me worried, and I'm glad I was worried because things wouldn't have worked right. Okay. So we've added the note feed to each contact, right? And so the next step is to update list contacts to pass each contact its associated notes. So we're going to edit the list contacts, and what we need to do is we need to subscribe to the notes publication. We need to pass the notes that we retrieve as a property. We need to make sure that we're ready to render the page only when both subscriptions are ready. And we need to make sure that we define this array of notes. Let's see how we do that. List contacts. So we go in here, and we need to get the notes associated with this person for this page. Let's review in case you're lost, right? Here's the list contacts page. Let's go up here. Here's the list contacts page. The list contacts page has to supply all of the notes that this user has typed in for all of their contacts. So this page has to subscribe to the notes collection so that we can generate that data. All right. How are we going to do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we've got to subscribe to notes. And what are subscriptions? Subscriptions are ways of getting the user's local mini Mongo database running inside their client browser to have the data that's necessary to be rendered on the page, right? So you render data in Meteor. The notion is the data that you render in a page is extracted from a little Mongo database running inside each client. Okay, and our subscriptions are the subscription publish subscribe model is the way that we tell the server, hey, what data is needed to be in my mini Mongo database in order for me to render this page appropriately. And so in this case, for the list context page, we need to know both all of the contacts owned by this user as well as all of the notes owned by this user. Okay, so that means that we need to now supply a new property called notes.find. Okay, and then finally we need to, well, not finally, but in addition, we need to say that this ready property is going to be true only when subscription.ready is true and subscription2.ready is true. Let's just briefly review what these things are. When you invoke this Meteor subscribe, you get this object called a subscription back. And that subscription has a function you can call, this object has a function you can call that will return true when Meteor has actually gone off to the server and gotten all of the data associated with that publication. Okay? And so the way we use that is that the predefined render method that React has, in our case, is going to be a method that says, hey, if my this.props.ready is true, which means both of these two things are true, then go ahead and render the page. And I'm going to supply my own little method down here to do it. Otherwise, show a loading icon. Okay? And that way, if you're retrieving a whole lot of data from the database and it takes a while to get it, then your page shows something immediately, which is the little spinning ball or whatever it is. And then once all of the data has been found or put into the client, then both of these things return true, and it'll go ahead and render it, and things will look appropriate. Okay, so notes is not defined, so we can go ahead and import notes from API/note/notes. Okay. So we've got the green check mark. That's good news. Let's go back and review So we subscribe to the notes publication. We pass notes as a prop. Oh, we didn't do that. Good thing we checked. Notes prop types dot array dot is required. Okay. Change the array prop to be true. We did that, and we update prop types to include an array of notes. Okay, we did that. Yeah, this was what so we added that, plus we added that. So these should always be kind of, in parallel. If you return 3 objects from this in this return statement, you have to declare all 3 of them here. All right, now in list context, you'll need to update the call to the contact component to pass in the notes associated with this. So here's where we're mapping through, we're rendering a contact. But now in our updated version of contact, we want this contact to also display the notes associated with it. So instead of just passing key and in contact, we have to pass key, contact, and notes. So what I'll do is I'll take this and we'll replace this by that. And that unfortunately is too long, so if we do a propeller meta L, we just do this. Maybe see what happens when we do that. There we go. All right, so formatting is not the best, unfortunately. But what we're going to do now is we're going to pass in the contact. We're going to render a contact, passing at the index, which is just for internal React uses, so it knows how to manipulate the virtual DOM. We're going to pass the data about the contact, and then also we're going to pass the notes associated with this contact. And the notes associated with this particular contact are all of the notes where we invoke the filter function, which is defined on arrays. So we could have used the underscore filter function, but it turns out that in ES6, the arrays have a filter function, just like underscores, defined implicitly. So this is a little more straightforward. We call notes, and we're going to filter, and we're going to pass in a function that says we want to keep the note. Don't filter out the note if the contact ID associated with the note is the same as the underscore ID of the contact, right? So this contact has a document ID. If the note matches that document ID in its contact ID field, then we want to keep it in because that means that this note is a note for this specific contact. Okay. So now, if we've done everything correctly, we should at least be able to render things without error. So let's kind of take a look. So that's okay. And then we go here, and that's okay. And actually what you can see is that there's a little extra space at the bottom. And it turns out that feed component takes up, I don't know, like 5 pixels or something, even when there's no notes to render. So, so that's kind of how you can check to make sure that part is rendering okay. All right, next we're going to implement add note. So, it's no good if we can't somehow define a note. We have to implement a little component that provides a form that enables us to add a note. And so one way to do that, there's a lot of ways to do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the add contact code, create a copy of that called add note, but add contact is in the pages, but I'm going to take this and make the copy in the components directory because add note is really a component. It's a little thing that appears maybe multiple times within a page. It's not an actual page itself. Okay, so add contact to add note. So here's add contact. Go to components. We'll call it add note. And here we are in add note. And so we want to change add contact to add note. And there's only 2 matches, but that's good, so we'll replace all. Okay, so our new add note contains a form schema variable, but you don't really need it in this case because the schema associated with notes is exactly the right schema to be used in this form. Okay, so in the Meteor application template React, what we used as a basis for that, the schema associated with adding a add stuff or whatever, or I'm sorry, what the contact, the schema for adding a contact was different from the schema in the contact database, and so we had to define a separate schema. But in this case, all we have to do is we can use the schema we defined for the notes collection. Okay, if we go here, what you can see is that's exactly that's exactly the right set of fields for our form is going to contain exactly those set of fields. So we might as well use the schema. We could have just cut and pasted them into that form schema, but that seems ridiculous. What that means is that down here, instead of form schema, we're going to have to say note schema, because that's the one we're going to actually be using. Okay, we don't need simple schema anymore because we're not using that. And so, always struggling to remember these things. So it's note, owner, contact ID, and date. Note, owner, contact ID, and not date. Contact ID and created at are the 4 fields. We don't need to use that anymore because we're actually explicitly getting the owner out of the field. And then we can say note, owner, contact ID, created at. And this is going to be a notes insert. And we could say, I don't know, note added successfully if we want and we can maybe make this a note error. So that's our submit, and now we don't refer to context anymore, which makes sense because this is all about the add note component, and we don't need Meteor anymore, so we get rid of that. And then coming down here, so we've got this segment. This doesn't have the right data in it. So let's go back here. Node owner contact created at, and the segment should really look like this. I'll go over this in a second after we cut and paste it. So here's the segment field, and we paste it. And what we can see here is that the only field that is visible to the user is the text field that adds a timestamp note, and of course the submit button. We're going to have all these hidden fields which maintain the value of owner, contact ID, and created at. That's so that the schema is happy, and we can pass this data, on to our submit form and get it out. But we're not going to actually display that to the user in the form. Okay, so we need to define a hidden field. Maybe we can just do it this way. Okay, and then this dot props, we need an owner and a contact ID string. And so we need actually I think, I'll go back here. Yeah, so we have I gave you the code for defining those because that's what this is saying. It's saying, it's missing in props validation. So we don't have any props validation because we didn't have any props before. So we add this add node.prop types. Unfortunately, prop types is not defined. So let's go find prop types. Here's the definition. So we can just do one of these and then go up here, put it in. All right, and we get to the green check mark, which is good. Let's see. Oh, we can delete the grid column, and header components surrounding the call to autoform. Grid column, and header components. Whoops. grid column, header, components, and then grid and grid column, and then this, that, let me do this. Yeah, that doesn't look as good as I wanted. Let's put this back. How's that look? It's not that good. Oh, okay, so we got rid of grid and header. So, cool. Got to the green check mark. And we've got our add note component. Now we got to add the call to add note to our contact component. So we're going to add a card.content to provide the add note. See, we're trying to get this into here. We've defined the component in this file. Now we just have to use it. So let's copy that. And in our contact component, we now want to have below this, and we need add note. So we want to import add note from / components add note. Okay. All right. Let's see. We've got the green check mark. Okay, so if we've done this correctly, we go to list context. We should now see our little thing appearing, and fantastic, it does. And after adding note and pressing submit, we should see something like this. Okay, so Henry met for lunch, discussed scuba diving, submit, success, note added successfully. There it is. Okay. Yeah. Called, no answer, right? Success, looks good. We can add something completely different over here. Called and offered lunch. And again, it goes, you know, and if we go to add contact and back, we can see it's re-retrieving this stuff, and we're getting the notes associated with the appropriate contact, and only those notes that this user has created. Okay, so let's check for ESLint errors. So to do that, we have to quit Meteor. Meteor npm run lint. Cool, nothing. And now we can stop our timer 28:45. We can call it 30 minutes. What the heck? Commit and push notes one branch. Oh, and we need to have some kind of what do we say? Notes one finished in 30 minutes. Finished in 30 minutes. Commit to notes one. Push origin. Okay, there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this. Kind of a long one, a lot in here. Take your time with it. Maybe, you know, just try to really understand how each of these little pieces is important to extending the application. But really, if you get this, the sky's the limit. You can do anything. Good luck.